Today, I'd like to welcome Dr. Diane Burns to Deep Power CEO Chats. Diane received her master's and PhD of geology at the University of Wyoming. She then became an associate professor at St. Lawrence in Canton, New York. Following her time at St. Lawrence, she became an associate professor at Eastern Illinois University, where she served in that role for 15 years. She recently was appointed Department Chair of Geology and Geography at Eastern Illinois University. Diane, welcome to Deep Power.
Oh, thank you very much.
So Diane, I would love to learn a little bit more about your background and what led you to be interested in geology and your subsequent role now as department chair at EIU.
Well, this is an interesting story, Andrew. I actually have a degree in English and Fine Arts. That was my first bachelor's degree. And then I got out into the working world and started doing jobs, but in extracurricular activities. I was doing technical rock climbing. And when you're up close and personal with the rock and holding on for dear life, you're kind of curious about how strong that rock may be. And so it came at a point in time when I was looking to go back to school and get another degree and re-educate myself, retool where I was going to go. And so geology just seemed like a really great fit because I was already out there learning about the rocks and whatever. And so I started back in about 1990 and got my undergraduate at Sac State in California, and then on to Wyoming, and now I'm at Eastern Illinois University. So wow. It's an interesting road, but it's a extremely interesting field. We cannot live without understanding geology. We cannot live without understanding the processes. Every day that we're faced with different phenomena that occur. Floods, earthquakes, you name it, it happens. And it's happening because the earth is a dynamic process, a dynamic system. And so there's a lot involved with it. And if we understand it, then we can live on our planet a little bit more easily.
Oh, I love that. What a climb, I guess, pun intended, from English language background to geology. I think that's amazing. You and I were briefly discussing prior to our interview here about the problem in the U.S. education system of moving away from earth sciences, and I actually hadn't heard that. I'd love for you to share that and kind of explain why that's such a big problem, especially with how important things like geothermal energy or all of those natural disasters that you said that are caused by the Earth's movement. Why has the education system changed or moved away from earth sciences, and what's the impact that you're seeing now because of that?
Oh, it's phenomenal. It's really a problem. It's a huge problem because we're not teaching in the K through 12 levels. We're not teaching earth sciences anymore. They're working away from it. It's partially a mindset, but mostly, especially in Illinois, they've decided that the physics, chemistry, and math and biology are the more important. And I'm not disparaging those topics whatsoever, but the earth sciences, geology and geography got the people, if they weren't I can't speak here. If they didn't have any proclivities towards sciences, then they said, okay, well, let's put them in geology or geography. And so it's gotten the stigma, at least in Illinois, of being the slow learners group. So if you are not exactly the smartest person, let's get you into geology and geography. And that's absolutely the worst information to pass along to students, because now the students themselves are like, oh, I'm in the dumb class. And when they get assigned to the earth sciences, and it's absolutely the worst kind of perception because we live on the earth and we have to understand it. And physics and chemistry and biology are all a part of it, but that doesn't make geology a lesser science. And so it's a shame. And so unfortunately, the students have to, until they get to college, if they go to college, because, not everybody's headed down that path. Not everybody should go down that path. But if they go to college and then they discover that they're already kind of a little bit behind the ball because, folks that have been in K through 12 and they've been working towards a chemistry or they've been interested in biology and have been supported, then they're going to be a little bit further along. And the geologists or people that have interested in geology are not being served. And we're running out of geologists. We have a nationwide shortage. We're here in Eastern Illinois University in Central Illinois, Charleston, about 3 hours south of Chicago. And we have people knocking on our door from Dubai and Texas saying, hey, can you have geologists come to us because we need them? So there's a real shortage across the world, but especially in the United States, because we have not been making geologists.
Wow.
We here at Eastern Illinois make great geologists. We actually have a 100% success rate for people graduating from our geology program. If they look for a geology job, they get it. If they go to graduate school, they get accepted and they get full rides is what they call it, which means all their tuition and fees paid for. So it's a great program, but we can't make them, we're limited by the number of people who come with the interest. And we need to have more people with interest in geology, because if you understand geology, you understand where we live. And that's a really important concept.
Well, right. And you hear the phrase, which is really sad, dumb as a rock, and you mentioned, maybe people feel like they're they're slower. And so they go to that. But here, my experience has been recently working with Deep Power is some of the smartest people I know are geologists. And when we're talking about solving some of the world's problems, which is tapping into Earth's unlimited source of energy in terms of geothermal, there can't be a more important cause. And I know you have like fusion, which is a very clean but debatable form of energy production. But you have some of the smartest people, like a nuclear, a fusion, like a scientist that you think of when it comes to fusion. But now you have geothermal energy, which has almost as much potential. I'm meeting some of the smartest people that I know. And so I understand what you're saying, and I can't disagree more that people that study the earth sciences and geology in particular aren't smart, right? Because there's challenges across the earth. And what I love at Deep Power and our goal we're trying to accomplish is to create drilling technology, not just drilling technology, as well as a platform of other technologies to enable geothermal. And what we love is if you can drill 7 miles deep, almost anywhere on the planet, you can tap into this Earth's potential energy, right? And so, yeah, and what fuels us is being able to provide energy independence. And that's wars have been started and fought over energy, right? Oil. And so our ability to disconnect energy from those regimes or countries or dictators is so important. And for anyone that might be interested in geology, that's thinking of going to EIU potentially, think about that as your cause, right? That's one angle of geology. I get it. But to be able to change the world and provide energy independence, like what better thing can you study in geology and go into that field, right? I think that's exciting to me.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is that to be a geologist, you have to understand chemistry, you have to understand physics, understand biology. It all folds into it.
Yep.
There's no better or lesser science. It's really what you need. It's the tool that you need at the time.
Yep.
And geology, if you're going to be, penetrating the earth to get down to the hot spots, you got to understand the strata. You got to understand what's going on beneath your feet.
Absolutely. And that's something that we'll talk about hard rock, okay? Or super hard rock, as they call it in the geothermal space. Being, traditional oil and gas companies have drilled far enough to tap into that oil shale reserves, where when it gets too hard, it's no longer economically viable for them to keep drilling. So the traditional oil and gas industry has stopped drilling when rock has gotten too hard, and therefore no one's tried to go farther. But hard rock is a problem. As you go 5, 6, 7 miles deep, the pressure of the earth on top of that rock increases the hardness and the difficulty in drilling. But from your background as a geologist, being able to drill through super hot rock anywhere on the earth is a challenge. And I know that where you are on the earth changes the chemical composition of the rock and what kind of rock. But from your background as a geologist, what kind of hurdles or opportunities can we have by understanding that geology and what we might have to do to drill through it, I guess?
Well, it's a very complex world in which we live, and you have a basic understanding of tectonics and whatnot. I mean, you live and breathe this stuff. But we have been 4.5 billion years and a continual shifting. I mean, we have a very dynamic planet. So it's not a simplistic layer upon layer upon layer. And so you've got all this complication down there. And the complication is you've got softer rocks that you can drill through pretty easily, like your limestones and your shales and whatnot. And then you got your harder rocks, like your igneous things that are much more robust. And then, like, as you're alluding to, the pressure just makes it even more impenetrable. But going back what you were talking about with the oil industry, they're not going to want to go any much further than that because the pressures get too high. They have the blowouts. They do have blowout preventers now on their rigs and stuff, but it's just not the same scenario. So what you're looking for is different than what they're looking for. And so the technology will have to change below where the oil and gas is being retrieved from. But that being said, you can use geologists to exploit, because what they would do then is they could figure out the subsurface. And so you'd want to have a place on the earth where you're drilling that's going to be closer. I mean, for all intents and purposes, what you want to have is the closest, so it's the cheapest. And so there are places on Earth where the crust has thinned. For example, the mid-ocean ridge, it's thin there. It's almost non-existent because that's the area that is going to have the best heat. And so you're going to be able to access that real easily there. You're not going to access it so easily on one of the older cratons, or like, for example, up in the Canadian Shield. That's really thick. And so you're not going to be able, you'd have to drill through a whole lot more to get down to the really hard layers, the really hot layers. And so you have to understand what's beneath you in order to drill appropriately. So that's all part and parcel of it.
Yeah, and that's something that I guess the holy grail in the geothermal industry is to reach 400 degrees Celsius. And that's when this interesting chemistry, physics thing happens with the material down there, that it's no longer a water or a gas. It's called supercritical gas, I guess. So what happens is, and this is probably not new to you, is that the energy production potential in supercritical gas is 10 times more than like a water or another gas. And so 400 degrees Celsius is this magic number. And to your point, there are areas on the earth closer to volcanic activity or to the mid-ocean crust that you're talking about, where you can reach those temperatures at more shallow depths. But what I find is interesting in terms of geology is being able to survey and use new forms of technology to identify parts of the earth that have different energy composition, right? And so, for example, I had an interview with a scientist at the Los Alamos labs in New Mexico, where they're using artificial intelligence and machine learning to do different types of surveying that have never been done to help us understand where those temperature gradients might be, which I think is fascinating that you can use artificial intelligence to do stuff like that. But I guess you talk about the Earth's tectonics, from your understanding of geology, like, how do you find pockets of 400 degrees Celsius gases throughout the earth? I mean, there's probably studies out there, or, from your experience as a geologist, are there certain conditions that create hotter temperatures?
Well, that's a loaded question. Basically, what you want to boil it down to is we have to categorize what's going on subsurface, and you can't do that just by looking at various and sundry things on the surface. You have to actually engage in this geologic investigation. So you use reflection seismology, you use LIDAR, not LIDAR, that's superficial, but you use a variety of technologies to go below, but you have to investigate each one of those areas for what you're doing. And this goes back to what I was saying before. When they were drilling for oil and gas, they're drilling for a specific type of situation and whatnot. And so when you're going into geothermal and when you're looking for those hot rocks, you want to think about it in a different way. And so you need to categorize what's underneath. And so that way you can find out what's going on, and you can figure out where you can get those hot pockets.
That makes sense. It's funny that as a child, well, most children are fascinated by rocks, right? Like, I have four little children, and I can't go on a walk without one of them stopping and picking up a rock and admiring it, right? And so to go back to our first question about the K through 12 education process and the problems they have, is I think children in particular are naturally inclined to be fascinated by rocks, right? I can't drive through a canyon without just admiring and awe the rock formations around me. And it's funny, I did take a geology class when I went to Brigham Young University my freshman year, and I was fascinated. I loved it. It was one of my favorite classes, but at that time I was like, how do I get a job in geology?
Right.
Right? And that was a lack of understanding of the opportunity out there. But I did. My first ever geology class was in college. It was one of my favorite classes. We were out looking at rocks all the time. I thought it was fun. I felt like a kid again, right?
Yeah, right.
And to your point, there's not enough understanding around that science and what it can do. But I'm grateful for your time and the effort to be able to share with us, the problems, but also the opportunities. And give me some other ideas. I mean, I'm focusing on geothermal energy production, but what other job opportunities are there for geologists once they leave college?
Oh, thank you very much for asking. There actually, a lot of it centers on environmental, as you can imagine. We actually have the unique situation where we ruin the environment and we can clean it up with the geologists, all in the same job job discipline.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes you'll have geologists, doing mining or whatever, and I'm not knocking it, but there are some environmental repercussions to doing mining and petroleum and whatnot. And so then we can create the problems, and then we also clean them up.
Yeah.
But there's a variety of work in the national park systems, for example, the conservation police policy. You always want to get somebody in Washington to advocate on behalf of the environment and geological projects and whatnot. Then there's also teaching, of course. You want to please make more generations of next geologists. And then mostly it's the petroleum and the environmental consulting. That's really the main thing. But a lot of people get into government industry. They get into, I mean, it's far reaching. There was actually, I'll give you a little anecdotal story. There was a guy that I went to school with back at Sac State, and he ended up being a vintner because he's a geologist. He understands soil and the water, the hydraulics and all this stuff. And so he made wonderful grapes that he then turned into wine. How can you turn everything earth into a job? Well, a lot of it is related to understanding geology.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating. And I know there are some negative stereotypes about mining and oil, but it's funny that, we have this unsatiable appetite to consume in our culture, whether that's people wouldn't think that if they hold up their phone, that many of the components in that phone come from a mining source somewhere, right? Lithium or cobalt or sources of precious metals that we want to get away from our dependence on fossil fuels, right? But that then leads towards lithium or batteries, right? Well, those come from the earth as well, and they're precious metals that come from rocks. And so, and there are environmental impacts. And I know that's part of the problems that I face at Deep Power is people's concern about drilling, right? And the effects of drilling. And I think that there needs to be a lot more education and advocacy in the form of moving away from fossil fuel isn't like this clean, forget it type response to the environment. It has an impact one way or another. The question is that impact more sustainable than the predecessor? And for us, we believe that even though there's some drilling and there are some environmental impact, the clean, renewable source of the Earth's energy in terms of geothermal is worth the potential impact of drilling, right? And so there's education that has to happen. And same with lithium. I talked to my family just this weekend about the impact of lithium ion batteries and how you have to have cobalt with that to stabilize that. Well, cobalt is a precious metal that comes from China and the Congo. And there's massive problems with those sources of material, right? And so I think there's just a lot of education that has to happen. But to your point, you can't have a battery operated anything in our home or in our lives that doesn't come from some source of geology, right?
Absolutely.
So it is around us.
Well, and going back to what you were talking about with the fusion, because that's a new topic, they just successfully were able to do that. But people have a natural fear of nuclear power and whatever, and from all the 50s stories where they had all the big, supersized villains or whatever came out of the exposure to
Yeah.
radiation. But the point is that they have a natural distrust. And so geothermal doesn't seem to come with that stigma. So there's a benefit there. There's
Yeah.
also the positivity of that it's just heat. It's not a specific thing. It's not cobalt or it's not
Right.
lithium or no specific thing. It's just heat. And so if you're dragging that up and using that for us on the surface, which it's not going to deplete the earth, we're not going to suck all the energy out, people.
Yeah.
It's still there. But if you're just bringing the heat to the surface, you're not, depleting a resource. You're not, and realistically, it should just come up to the surface with your systems. It's not being transported. So it's not having those problems that are
Yeah.
associated with oil transport. We have a lot of spills that happen with the refined oil that are just horrific. And so this is right there in place. Bring it up, heat.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any more simple than that.
Absolutely. Well, Diane, I'm grateful for your time to spend with us on today's CEO chat. I want to make a plea, I guess, to our audience or anyone that might listen that you share this video with. If you have any interest in geology, and that's like we in this discussion, that's so much bigger than just looking at a rock. It's lithium batteries, it's cobalt, it's mining, it's oil, it's government, it's geothermal. There's a lot that is involved with that, but there are potentials to change the world through the study of geology. And so for anyone watching this, if there's any interest to learn, I'd advise or recommend you go to Eastern Illinois University and learn what they're doing there, because that sounds pretty good odds that if you go in to become a geologist at university, you're guaranteed a job. I mean, there's not a lot of jobs or I guess educational routes where you can do that and say that. So thank you for your time. Go look at your Eastern Illinois University's website, learn about their geology department, what they have to offer. And thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Burns.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. And thank you for sharing your technology advances with geothermal energy, because that's really exciting.
Oh, I appreciate that. We'll stay in touch as we make those advancements, and we'll refer people over to you if we know they're interested.
Absolutely. I'll be sending some your way.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.